A soldier's young son was about to be attacked when a waitress threw herself over him, taking every blow until she collapsed on the street. By the next morning, 60 Harleys thundered down Main Street and filled the courthouse steps. Police stepped back. The city fell silent, and one act of courage turned into a brotherhood no one dared to challenge. The shove came hard enough to rattle her teeth, but Rachel Moore didn't fall. Not yet. She locked her arms around the boy behind her, bracing against the second strike, taking it full across her side. The sound of shoes scuffing against wet pavement, the cruel laughter, the rush of adrenaline. Everything blurred together as she became a human shield. One waitress, one 12-year-old soldier's son, and a pack of older teens circling like wolves under a streetlight that buzzed and flickered above them. Rachel's chest burned, but her voice cut through the chaos. "Run, Evan! Run!" The boy hesitated, trembling, his hands clinging to her jacket. "I can't leave you!" "Go!" she barked louder this time. The third blow sent her sprawling to her knees, her palms scraping against rough concrete. The world tilted, but she forced her head up just in time to see Evan break into a sprint, his sneakers splashing through puddles as he vanished into the dark. Relief flooded her, a fierce wave of triumph, even as the jeers rose again. She had bought him the chance. Only then did the street fall silent for a beat. The kind of silence where even the neon buzz from the diner seemed to pause. Rachel's breaths came in jagged bursts. The figures around her shifted, uncertain now that their smaller prey had escaped. One muttered something she couldn't catch. Another spit on the ground. For a moment, it felt as if time itself held its breath. Hours earlier, the night had been nothing more than routine. Rachel had worked the late shift at McKinley's diner, pouring coffee refills for truckers and slicing pie for the high school kids who couldn't let go of summer. The air outside had been heavy with the promise of rain. She had smiled tiredly when Evan Carter came in, just as he often did, backpack slung over one shoulder. He always ordered the same thing, chocolate milkshake, extra whipped cream. The boy was polite, soft-spoken, but his eyes always carried a trace of loneliness. His father, Sergeant Daniel Carter, was deployed out of state. His mother worked nights at the hospital. For Evan, the diner had become a refuge, and Rachel, 34 years old, no family of her own, had quietly stepped into a role she never asked for, someone who noticed him. That evening, after his milkshake was gone and the crowd had thinned, Evan lingered outside the diner, waiting for the bus that never seemed to come on time. Rachel was wiping down tables, watching him through the fogged-up glass, when she saw shadows gather. 4 boys, older, stronger, the kind who hunted weakness the way sharks scented blood in water. They closed in, shoving Evan against the lamppost, sneering at his army-issue backpack. Rachel's rag slipped from her hand. In that instant, instinct tore through her exhaustion. She didn't think. She moved. By the time she hit the street, her heart was pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. She shouted before she even reached them, her voice slicing through the damp night. When their eyes snapped toward her, when one laughed and said, "Mind your business, lady," she knew she could still turn back. She could still pretend she hadn't seen, but she kept running. The first shove nearly took her down. The second almost did. The third finally buckled her knees, but not before she shoved Evan free and screamed for him to run. When she hit the pavement, it was with the grim knowledge that she'd done what she could. Her vision swam. She heard the shuffle of sneakers retreating, the muttered curses, the fading taunts. When she lifted her head, the corner was empty except for the glow of the diner's neon. The boys had scattered into the night. Evan was gone, hopefully far enough by now. She sagged against the curb, chest heaving, pain radiating down her side. The world tilted again, but her resolve held. Better her than him. Down the block, the creak of a bar door broke the quiet. A man stepped out, leather vest catching the light, cigarette glowing at his lip. He froze, watching the scene with the stillness of someone used to sizing up trouble. His gaze lingered on the woman crumpled by the curb, the empty street where a child had fled. He ground out the cigarette beneath his boot, pulled a phone from his pocket, and spoke in a low voice that carried the weight of a promise. "Red, you'll want to hear this. A woman just stood between a soldier's boy and a pack of punks. She didn't back down." Before the line even went dead, the distant thunder of engines was already beginning to stir. The sound of engines hadn't yet reached the hospital where Rachel lay, but the city was already murmuring. News of the attack traveled faster than official reports. A waitress had thrown herself in front of a soldier's son and been carried away in an ambulance. The boy was safe, but shaken, repeating her name over and over, as if afraid the world would forget who had saved him. Evan Carter sat on a stiff plastic chair in the emergency ward, his backpack hugged tight against his chest, his shoes still wet from running, his eyes raw from tears he fought to hold back. Nurses moved around him, whispering in clipped voices. They knew his father was stationed far away, his mother working late shifts. She couldn't leave. Evan had no one to sit beside him until Red Donovan walked in. The president of the local Hells Angels chapter wasn't dressed for hospitals. His leather cut bore the miles of the road, and his boots carried the smell of rain. He moved through the waiting area with a presence that made even the tired night shift guards straighten. Red didn't ask for directions. He had already been told what happened. He stopped in front of Evan, crouched down so their eyes were level, and asked, "You're the boy she covered, aren't you?" Evan nodded, clutching his backpack tighter. She didn't even think. She saved me." His voice cracked. Red studied him, the corners of his weathered face tightening. "And where are your folks?" "My dad's deployed. Mom's at work." That answer hit Red harder than he let show. He put a heavy hand on the boy's shoulder, steady and warm. "Then you're not alone tonight. Not anymore." He rose and motioned to one of his brothers waiting near the door. "Stay with the kid. Nobody moves him until I say." Meanwhile, Rachel drifted in and out of consciousness. The fluorescent lights above her bed painted the world in sharp whites and shadows. Every time she surfaced, she caught pieces of conversations. Stable but needs rest. Took quite a beating. Lucky to be alive. None of it settled in. What anchored her was the memory of Evan's sneakers splashing away into the dark. She whispered his name once, and a nurse leaned close, promising that the boy was safe. That was enough to let her slip back under. Across town, police reports painted the incident as a minor street disturbance. The language was cold, distant, and wrong. Witnesses who had seen Rachel drop her rag and sprint into danger shook their heads at the phrasing. To them, there was nothing minor about a woman collapsing on the pavement so a soldier's son could escape. The story spread on phones and through whispers. That waitress from McKinley's. She stood in front of them. By morning, the silence of official channels clashed with the roar of public outrage. Neighbors left flowers at the diner's front step, taped notes of thanks to the glass. Evan returned with his mother, still shaken, pointing to the exact spot where Rachel had stood. "Right there," he told her. "She didn't move. She didn't let them touch me." His mother wrapped him close, her face pale with gratitude and fear. In the Angels clubhouse, Red listened to the boy's words replayed by his brother, who had stayed at the hospital. He sat at the head of the long table, rings tapping against wood, and let the silence linger before he spoke. "They think she stood alone," he said. But she doesn't stand alone anymore. Around him, heads nodded. Men who carried scars from the road, prison, and loss clenched their fists in quiet agreement. They weren't talking about retribution yet. They were talking about recognition. A woman had done what even uniformed men had hesitated to do. In their world, that meant she had earned something sacred: respect. Back at the hospital, Rachel opened her eyes fully for the first time since the street. Sunlight leaked through the blinds, soft and gold. Her throat was dry, her body aching, but the first face she saw wasn't a nurse. It was Evan, perched on a chair beside her, refusing to leave. His eyes widened when she stirred. "You're okay," he whispered, relief flooding his features. "I told them you'd wake up. I told them." Rachel tried to smile, though it came weakly. "You made it out," he nodded fiercely. "Because of you." She reached out, her hand trembling, and he caught it with both of his. In that fragile grip, a bond had been forged, stronger than either could understand. Outside, in the parking lot, the low rumble of motorcycles began to gather. The city was about to learn what it meant when 60 engines rolled for a cause. The rumble started as a whisper on the edge of town, but by dusk, it rolled like thunder. One engine, then another, until the air itself seemed to vibrate with the weight of 60 Harleys roaring down Main Street. Windows rattled, stray dogs ducked into alleys. People stepped out of their doorways to watch, some with fear, others with awe. The Hells Angels didn't sneak in. They arrived like a storm announcing itself. At the head of the column rode Red Donovan. His cut was faded from years of sun and rain, but the patches stitched into it still carried authority that made men straighten and strangers step aside. His face was carved with the lines of battles, both on the road and off it. When he twisted the throttle, the growl echoed against the courthouse steps, shaking the silence that officials had tried to maintain. In the diner where Rachel once poured his coffee, the regulars pressed against the windows, watching the spectacle unfold. "They came for her," one whispered, almost in disbelief. "All of them." Red swung his Harley into the hospital parking lot, boots hitting asphalt with a deliberate finality. Behind him, the bikes lined up in formation, chrome gleaming under the orange wash of sunset. For a moment, the place looked less like a medical ward and more like a fortress under siege. Nurses peered from upper-floor windows, their eyes wide at the sight of patched jackets filling the lot. Inside, Evan was still clutching Rachel's hand when he heard it. The walls trembled faintly, a sound he first mistook for distant thunder. But his eyes lit up when he recognized it. The roar of Harleys, the same sound his father had once told him meant loyalty, unbreakable and fierce. He looked at Rachel, his voice rising with excitement. "They came! I told them what you did, and they came." Rachel blinked, disoriented, unsure if she was dreaming. But then the door swung open, and the room filled with the unmistakable presence of leather and steel. Red Donovan himself stepped inside. He didn't crowd her, didn't shout. He simply removed his gloves, setting them on the tray table with reverence, and said, "You're family now." Rachel tried to sit up, confusion battling exhaustion. "Why? I don't even know you." Red's voice was calm but firm. "You stood between a soldier's boy and a pack of punks when no one else would. You didn't back down. That makes you one of us." Evan beamed, nodding so fast it made Rachel's heart ache. She wanted to argue, to dismiss it as dramatics, but the weight in Red's tone made her realize this wasn't just talk. These men had crossed counties in a single night because a woman in a diner apron refused to look away. Outside, the gathering swelled. More angels rolled in from neighboring towns, drawn by calls that spread faster than newsprint. The courthouse lawn, still empty hours before, now glowed beneath headlights and leather vests. Some carried banners. Others stood with arms folded, silent sentinels daring anyone to challenge what had been done to Rachel Moore. The police chief arrived in an unmarked car, stepping out stiff-backed, jaw tight. He scanned the sea of bikes with unease. His officers had filed a report, calling the incident minor. Now, staring at 60 engines idling in unison, he realized there was nothing minor about it. His radio buzzed with questions he couldn't answer. Should they intervene? Should they disperse the bikers? One look at the wall of chrome and steel told him the truth. They couldn't. Red stood outside now, his back to the hospital, his gaze fixed on the courthouse across the street. He didn't need to raise his voice. His silence alone pressed heavier than any threat. Around him, the angels stayed still, hands folded, boots planted, the growl of their engines cutting off one by one, until the town was left with nothing but the eerie echo of quiet power. Inside the hospital room, Rachel whispered to Evan, "Why are they here? I don't deserve this." Evan shook his head fiercely. "You saved me. That's why." Rachel's heart swelled with both fear and gratitude. She had acted without thought, but her choice had set something in motion far larger than herself. The Hell's Angels had gathered, and the city would never forget what their presence meant. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It had arrived, and with it came a silence that made the entire town hold its breath. By nightfall, the town was no longer its quiet self. The hum of everyday life, distant televisions, late-night buses, the occasional bark of a dog, was drowned out by the steady thunder of engines circling the heart of Main Street. 30 bikes had already lined the courthouse steps. Another 30 trickled in from highways and back roads. Riders answering calls passed from chapter to chapter, like sparks leaping across dry grass. Windows along Main Street glowed with faces pressed to glass. Shopkeepers stood at their doors, drawn by the vibration beneath their feet. Mothers pulled children close, not out of fear, but awe. People had seen bikers before, but never like this. Not 60 of them united, not for themselves, but for a waitress most of them had never met. Rachel lay awake in her hospital bed, too restless to sleep. Every throb in her ribs, every ache in her limbs reminded her of the pavement and the blows she had taken for Evan. Yet outside, the muffled chorus of engines carried through the walls, telling her she was no longer alone. The sound was strange, foreign to her world of coffee refills and late-night shifts, but it carried a promise. Downstairs, Evan leaned against Red Donovan's side, holding on to his leather vest like a lifeline. The boy's voice was small but fierce. "She saved me. She's the bravest person I've ever seen." Red rested one heavy hand on the boy's shoulder, the way a father might steady a son. His gravel-rough voice carried in the lobby where half a dozen bikers waited. "Listen close," he told them. "What she did for this boy, she did for all of us, for every soldier, for every family left behind. She didn't have colors on her back, but she showed more loyalty in one night than most men show in a lifetime." One of the bikers, his beard streaked with gray, nodded and muttered, "Then she's earned colors of her own." Red's eyes hardened with conviction. He straightened, his words slicing through the murmurs like a blade. "Tonight, she's family." The declaration rippled through the room, carried outside, where men leaning on handlebars repeated it quietly, almost reverently. A waitress no one had known yesterday was now claimed as kin by 60 hardened riders, and with that claim came a wall of protection stronger than any law. Across town, the police held an emergency meeting. The chief sat stiff at the head of the table, reports spread before him. 60 of them, one officer said, his voice low, lined up across the courthouse. Not doing anything, just standing there. Standing there is enough, another replied. Nobody's willing to cross that line, not even us. The chief pinched the bridge of his nose. He knew the math. His department couldn't disperse that many without escalating into something the city would regret. And the optics, cops forcing bikers away while a battered waitress lay in the hospital, would spark outrage louder than the engines outside. For now, he told his men to hold back, to wait. Back at the hospital, Rachel finally convinced a nurse to let her sit in a wheelchair and rolled toward the lobby. Her breath was shallow, her body weak, but she needed to see. When the doors slid open, she was met by a sight she could hardly comprehend. Rows of leather jackets, boots planted firm, and eyes turned toward her, not with judgment, but with respect. The room fell quiet as Red stepped forward. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, Rachel saw past the gruff lines of his face to something steadier, recognition. "You didn't know that boy's father," Red said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "You didn't owe him a damn thing, but you put yourself on the line anyway. That's loyalty. That's courage. And in our world, that makes you family." Rachel's throat tightened. She wanted to protest, to say she was just a waitress, that she hadn't thought, that she'd simply reacted. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she felt Evan's small hand slip into hers. His eyes shone with pride, not fear. In that moment, Rachel understood. Outside, the storm reached its full height. 60 bikes lined both sides of Main Street, chrome gleaming under street lamps, patches catching the light like banners of defiance. The engines idled low, their growl a warning and a promise. The entire town felt the pressure of that silence. Police, reporters, neighbors alike. And above it all, the unspoken message was clear. The waitress who had shielded a soldier's son would never stand alone again. Morning broke heavy with expectation. The courthouse, usually a place of routine hearings and small-town disputes, looked like the stage of a reckoning. Reporters clustered on the steps, cameras already rolling, their breath fogging in the cool air. Police officers formed a line near the entrance, trying to look calm, but their eyes kept darting down the street where the sound was growing louder. The engines arrived first, a low, rolling thunder that made the pavement hum. Then came the sight. 60 Harleys advancing in formation, chrome flashing in the pale light of dawn. The Hells Angels weren't hiding. They rode slow, deliberate, as if each rotation of the wheels announced their intent. When they reached the courthouse, the riders cut their engines in unison. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. Red Donovan dismounted first, his boots striking the ground like a gavel. Behind him, the others followed, lining up on either side of the steps. They didn't shout, didn't chant. They simply stood. Leather vests stitched with the unmistakable death's head patch, arms folded across broad chests, gazes fixed on the building where justice was supposed to be served. Inside, Rachel Moore shifted uncomfortably in her wheelchair. She had insisted on coming despite the doctor's protests. Bandages peeked from beneath her blouse, and bruises colored her arms. But her eyes were clear. Evan Carter walked beside her, small hand resting on the chair's arm. Red entered through the side door, a silent escort of bikers parting the way. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone made the bailiff hesitate before asking Rachel to state her name for the record. The defendants were already seated. 4 young men slouched in their chairs, their bravado faltering under the weight of the crowd outside. Their lawyer leaned close, whispering advice that fell flat against the silence pressing in from the steps. When the judge entered, the usual shuffle of rising bodies was delayed. Everyone seemed unsure whether the rows of bikers in the gallery would move, but they did. Standing slowly, their silence reverberating like a hymn. The judge cleared his throat, unsettled. The prosecutor laid out the charges: assault, attempted battery against a minor, disturbing the peace. The language was dry, clinical. But when Rachel was wheeled to the stand, the air shifted. She gripped the armrest, steadied herself, and looked directly at the four who had cornered Evan. Her voice trembled only at first. "I told him to run," she said, nodding toward Evan, who watched from the front row, his hands clenched in his lap. "They had him trapped. I couldn't let them hurt him. I didn't think. I just stood there." The defense attorney smirked, trying to pounce. "Ms. Moore, isn't it true you escalated the situation by inserting yourself?" A murmur rose from the gallery, low and dangerous. One biker leaned forward, his knuckles whitening on the bench. Red lifted a hand, a simple gesture, and the room fell back into silence. The weight of 60 pairs of eyes bearing down made the lawyer swallow hard before continuing. Rachel lifted her chin. "If standing between a child and a beating is escalation, then yes, I escalated, and I'd do it again." Her words struck like a hammer. Even the judge paused, lips pressing together as if absorbing the gravity of what she said. Outside, cameras captured the line of Harleys gleaming in the sunlight. Reporters whispered about the silent wall that had descended on the courthouse, a show of force without a single word spoken. Inside, that silence seemed to seep through the walls, pressing on everyone present. The prosecutor, sensing momentum, turned to Evan. The boy's small frame looked almost swallowed by the witness chair, but his voice carried. "She saved me," he said firmly. "She stood there so I could get away. She didn't even think about herself." One of the defendants shifted, suddenly restless. The judge noticed. The facade of cocky indifference was cracking. When arguments closed, the judge's gavel came down with unusual weight. "The defendants will remain in custody pending trial. Their actions represent not only violence, but cowardice against a child, no less. This court will not minimize that." The courtroom exhaled, a release of tension that had gripped it for hours. Some people clapped, only to be hushed by the bailiff. Others wept quietly, relief etched on their faces. Evan turned to Rachel and whispered, "We won." Outside, the reaction was louder, freer. Reporters rushed to deliver breaking updates. Headlines scrolled across national networks within minutes. "Waitress who shielded soldier's son sees attackers convicted." "Hell's Angels stand watch as justice served." The story was no longer just local. It was everywhere. Talk shows debated the meaning of loyalty. Editorials praised Rachel's courage. Some politicians stumbled through interviews, trying to explain why police had hesitated when a waitress had not. On the courthouse steps, the angels lined both sides again, forming a corridor of silence. As Rachel emerged, cameras clicked furiously, microphones shoved forward, but no one dared to break through the human wall of leather and steel. Red Donovan walked at her side, and though he spoke little, his words carried. Justice answered today. Loyalty made sure it was heard. The crowd erupted, cheers mixing with the sound of idling engines. For once, the roar wasn't frightening. It was triumphant. People who had once crossed the street to avoid bikers now applauded them. Mothers waved. Veterans raised their hands in salute. The silence that had once intimidated had become a shield for the community. By evening, the city pulsed with conversation. In diners, customers replayed the footage on their phones, pointing out the moment Rachel raised her chin on the stand, the moment Red lifted a single hand and silenced a room of reporters. On street corners, strangers exchanged stories of courage they had once thought too small to matter. If a waitress could stand against 4 aggressors, What excuse did anyone else have? The police department issued a statement, sterile and rehearsed. We are committed to ensuring justice and safety for all citizens. But the words rang hollow against the images of Rachel's battered frame, against the sight of 60 men who had filled the gap where authority had hesitated. For Rachel, the noise was overwhelming. She never asked for cameras, never wanted headlines. But as she sat in her hospital room, flowers covering the windowsill, she understood something had shifted. The city saw her differently now. So did she. What she had done in a moment of desperation was now etched into the memory of an entire community. That night, the local news ended their broadcast with a simple montage. Rachel wheeling out of the courthouse, Evan gripping her hand, and the long, silent line of Harleys fading into the horizon. The anchor's final words summed up what everyone already knew. Sometimes, justice isn't just decided in the courtroom. Sometimes, it's carried on the shoulders of those willing to stand when others won't. In the quiet that followed, the city realized it wasn't just the verdict that mattered. It was the silence that had forced everyone to listen. The morning of Rachel Moore's release felt different from any other. The hospital, usually humming with routine, carried an undercurrent of anticipation. Nurses who had watched her struggle back from the brink stopped by her room with quiet smiles. Some slipped folded notes into the bouquet of flowers by her bed. Simple words of thanks for the courage that had changed their city. Evan Carter was there before dawn, his backpack slung over his shoulder, a permanent fixture at her side. He had refused to miss the moment. "You ready?" he asked, his voice half excitement, half worry. Rachel adjusted the sleeves of her cardigan over the bandages still taped to her ribs. She was pale, still healing, but her eyes were steady. "Ready as I'll ever be." The orderly wheeled her toward the entrance. At first, the corridor looked normal. White walls, polished floors, the quiet shuffle of nurses. But as the doors opened onto the front steps, Rachel froze. Lined along both sides of the drive were 60 Harleys, engines idling low, chrome catching the sunlight like polished steel. The riders stood beside them, in full colors, silent, unmoving. A corridor of honor stretched from the hospital doors all the way to the street. Reporters were there too, cameras rolling, but their voices were hushed. The silence was overwhelming, not threatening, but reverent. A silence that honored a woman who had stood for a boy when no one else had. Rachel's hands trembled on the arms of her wheelchair. This is for me?" she whispered. Evan squeezed her shoulder. "No, it's for what you did." Red Donovan stepped forward, helmet in hand, his presence commanding, but softened by respect. He crouched so his eyes were level with hers. "Family protects family," he said simply. "From this day forward, you'll never walk alone." Her throat tightened. She wanted to protest again, to insist she wasn't worthy of this. But the words dissolved in the lump rising in her chest. Instead, she nodded, eyes shining. The orderly pushed her forward, and as she passed between the rows, every rider lifted 2 fingers from their sides in silent salute. Not a word was spoken, yet the gesture resonated more deeply than any applause. Nurses standing by the doors wiped their eyes. Onlookers bowed their heads. Even the reporters lowered their cameras for a moment, giving space to something larger than news. At the end of the corridor, Red's Harley waited. He gestured to Evan. "Hop on, kid. You ride today, too." Evan's grin broke wide, the first real smile since the night of the attack. He climbed onto the bike, looking back at Rachel as if to say, "We made it." Rachel's wheelchair stopped beside them, And for the first time in days, she laughed. A quiet, disbelieving laugh at the sheer weight of the moment. She had walked out of her diner that night, thinking she was just a waitress, just one woman. Now, she was something else. A symbol of what it meant to stand when standing was hardest. The engines roared to life together, a single thunderclap that rolled across the city. People poured from shops and offices to watch as the procession moved down Main Street, Rachel at its heart. The corridor of honor stretched beyond the hospital. Now it stretched through the whole town. As the roar faded into the horizon, the story etched itself into the city's memory. One act of courage. One woman who nearly gave her life to save a soldier's son. One brotherhood that answered in silence. And a community that would never forget. In the flickering glow of a diner's neon sign, Rachel Moore's selfless act of shielding a soldier's son from a brutal attack transformed her from an ordinary waitress into a symbol of unwavering courage. This story unveils a powerful life lesson. True heroism lies not in seeking glory, but in acting instinctively to protect those who cannot protect themselves, even at great personal cost. Rachel, battered and bruised, stood firm against 4 aggressors to save young Evan, driven by nothing more than a fleeting moment of compassion. Her sacrifice sparked an extraordinary response. 60 Hell's Angels, often feared as outlaws, formed a silent, unshakable wall of loyalty around a courthouse, proving that honor transcends stereotypes. Their presence wasn't about chaos. It was a testament to a code that values those who stand tall when others turn away. Rachel's story stirs the heart, reminding us that one small act of bravery can ripple through a community, redefining justice and loyalty in ways louder than words. It challenges us to ask, when have we stood up for someone, not for recognition, but because it was right? In a world quick to judge, Rachel's courage and the angel's silent vigil show that humanity's strength lies in unity and sacrifice. What does this story awaken in you? Have you witnessed or shown such courage in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear how Rachel's bravery inspires you. If this tale of loyalty and sacrifice moves you, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story that proves the loudest messages are often spoken in silence. Join our community, share your voice, and let's keep these stories alive together.